Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I'm laying on the marble floor of my sister's mansion champagne, dripping from my hair, $10,000 worth of crystals scattered around me like deadly confetti. My wheelchair's overturned 3 feet away. Madison stands above me in her white engagement dress, screaming that I've been faking my paralysis for 2 years just to steal attention from her special moments. The 50 guests are staring in horrified silence. But what she doesn't see is Detective Sarah Collins, in the corner already dialing 911, because she's been investigating my accident this whole time. 2 years ago, my life changed forever on what everyone believed was a routine skiing trip to Aspen. I was 28 then, a successful architectural engineer living in Denver, designing sustainable commercial buildings that had started earning national recognition. Madison and I weren't just siblings back then. We were best friends, business partners, and each other's closest confidants. She was 26, running her own real estate development firm, and we often collaborated on projects that combined my engineering expertise with her market insights. Our family had built an empire in Colorado's construction industry. Dad, Robert Thompson, started with a small contracting business in the 1980s, and grew it into Thompson Construction, one of the state's largest commercial builders. Mom Catherine handled the business operations with ruthless efficiency. Together, they'd accumulated wealth that placed us firmly in Denver's social elite, with properties in Aspen Boulder Hills and downtown Denver. Madison had been dating Preston Walsh for 8 months when she announced their engagement. Preston came from hotel industry royalty. His family owned the Walsh Hotel Group with luxury properties across the Rocky Mountain region. He was 32, charming, in that practiced way that comes from generations of inherited wealth, and he seemed to genuinely adore Madison's ambitious energy. The engagement party was Madison's dream event. She'd spent 6 months planning every detail at her $5 million home in Boulder Hills, a sprawling contemporary masterpiece overlooking the Front Range. 200 guests were expected, including Colorado's business elite, political figures, and entertainment personalities. The Champagne Tower alone cost $10,000. Crystal arranged in perfect geometric precision that would make any engineer proud. I should have been celebrating with genuine happiness. Madison deserved this moment. She'd worked incredibly hard building her business, often putting in 80-hour weeks to prove herself worthy of the family name. But as I wheeled through her home that evening, watching her flit between guests in her custom white cocktail dress, something felt fundamentally wrong. The skiing accident had happened at Snowmass on a weekend retreat Madison had organized for our family and business associates. We were staying at the newly constructed Alpine Vista Lodge, a Thompson construction project that had opened just 3 months earlier. The building was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows exposed timber beams, and a wraparound deck that offered breathtaking mountain views. I'd been standing on that deck discussing architectural details with another engineer when the railing suddenly gave way. The fall was only 12 feet, but I landed badly on the rocky slope below. The spinal injury left me paralyzed from the waist down, ending my career dreams and changing everything about how I navigated the world. Tonight, as Madison's engagement party swirled around me, I found myself studying the guest list with growing unease. Most faces were familiar. Family friends, business associates, political connections that had helped Thompson Construction secure major municipal contracts over the years. But one face stopped me cold. Standing near the bar, deep in conversation with Preston, was Vincent Torres. I recognized him immediately as the construction foreman who'd been responsible for inspecting the Alpine Vista Lodge deck before the resort's opening. Torres was 45, a 20-year veteran of the industry, with calloused hands and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades on construction sites. Why was Torres at Madison's engagement party? He wasn't family, wasn't a social contact, and certainly wasn't part of Preston's hotel industry circle. My stomach tightened as I watched their conversation become increasingly animated. Preston kept glancing around nervously as if ensuring they weren't being overheard. When it came time for toasts, I'd prepared remarks celebrating Madison's happiness and welcoming Preston into our family. But as I wheeled toward the microphone, I noticed Preston whisper something urgent to Torres. The foreman immediately headed for the exit, moving with the quick efficiency of someone following explicit instructions. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the marble foyer where guests had gathered. "I've had the privilege of watching Madison build an incredible life through determination, intelligence, and unwavering integrity." But even as I spoke, those words, doubt crept into my mind. Torres's presence wasn't coincidence. The timing of his departure wasn't random. And suddenly, 2 years of accepted facts about my accident began feeling like carefully constructed fiction. Madison has always been the strongest person I know. I continued making eye contact with my sister as she stood beside Preston. She's never let obstacles define her limitations, and she's never allowed setbacks to diminish her ambitions. The irony of those words hit me as soon as I spoke them. Here I was, supposedly paralyzed and dependent, praising Madison's strength while harboring growing suspicions about the very accident that had left me this way. As applause filled the room, I caught sight of another unexpected guest. Detective Sarah Collins stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing an elegant black dress that couldn't quite disguise her law enforcement bearing. Collins was 35, a decorated investigator with Colorado's Fraud Task Force, and definitely not someone I'd expect at Madison's social gathering. Collins caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. Something in her expression suggested this wasn't a social visit. My hands gripped my wheelchair's armrests tighter as pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began forming in my mind. The perfect family celebration suddenly felt like something much more complicated and dangerous. After my toast, I maneuvered through the crowd toward Detective Collins, but she'd vanished. Instead, I found myself drawn toward Madison's home office, a space I'd helped design 2 years earlier when she first purchased the property. The contemporary architecture featured clean lines and open spaces, but Madison had added personal touches that reflected her business acumen. Awards from real estate associations, photographs with Colorado political figures, and architectural drawings of successful development projects. Tonight, however, something new caught my attention. Spread across her mahogany desk were blueprints I recognized immediately. The original plans for Alpine Vista Lodge. Why would Madison have these documents in her personal office? The project had been completed over 2 years ago, and she hadn't been directly involved in its construction. I wheeled closer, studying the technical drawings with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years interpreting architectural specifications. The deck railing specifications were clearly marked: steel reinforcement requirements, foundation anchoring depths, load-bearing calculations. Everything appeared standard and well within safety parameters. But underneath the main blueprints, I discovered a second set of plans. These showed the same deck structure but with significantly reduced reinforcement specifications. Critical support beams were marked for lighter gauge steel. Foundation anchoring depths were reduced by 18 inches. Load-bearing calculations had been dramatically decreased. "Axel, what are you doing in here?" Madison's voice from the doorway made me jump. She stood silhouetted against the hallway light, her engagement dress now slightly wrinkled from greeting guests. Her tone carried an edge I'd rarely heard before, protective and almost threatening. "I was looking for a quiet space," I replied, trying to sound casual. "The party's overwhelming, and I needed a few minutes to decompress." She entered the office and quickly began gathering the blueprints from her desk. "These are just old project files. Nothing interesting." "Madison, why do you have the Alpine Vista plans? And why are there 2 different versions?" Her hands froze over the documents. For several seconds, she didn't respond, and I could see her mind working to formulate an answer. When she finally looked at me, her expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. The construction industry is complicated, Axel. There are always multiple versions of plans, preliminary designs, value engineering alternatives, final approved specifications. You wouldn't understand the business side. I'm an architectural engineer, Madison. I understand construction documents better than most people. We're an architectural engineer, she corrected sharply. Your accident ended that career. Remember, you've been out of the industry for 2 years. Things change. The verbal blow hit deeper than any physical pain I'd experienced since the spinal injury. Madison had never spoken to me with such calculated cruelty before. This wasn't the sister who'd visited me daily during months of hospital rehabilitation, who'd helped modify my apartment for wheelchair accessibility, who'd insisted I move closer to family support. "Why is Vincent Torres at your engagement party?" I asked directly. Madison's face went completely white. "Who?" "Vincent Torres, the foreman who inspected the Alpine Vista deck before my accident. I saw him talking to Preston earlier." "You're mistaken. I don't know anyone by that name." But her reaction told a different story. Madison was lying, and she was doing it badly. My sister had many talents, but deception had never been one of them. She couldn't maintain eye contact, her voice pitched higher with stress, and she unconsciously touched her engagement ring when attempting to mislead. A nervous habit I'd observed since childhood. "Madison, what's really going on? Why do you have modified blueprints for the lodge where I was injured? Why is the foreman who approved that construction at your private party? And why are you lying to me about knowing him?" She moved closer to my wheelchair, her expression shifting from defensive to something approaching pity. "Axel, I know the accident was traumatic. Sometimes trauma causes people to see patterns that don't exist, to create conspiracies where there's just bad luck. Don't patronize me." "I'm not patronizing you. I'm being honest about something I've noticed over the past year. You've become paranoid suspicious of everyone's motives. Dr. Manning mentioned you've been asking strange questions during physical therapy sessions." Dr. Patricia Manning was my physical therapist, a woman I'd grown to trust during 18 months of rehabilitation. She was 42, a former Paralympic athlete who understood the psychological challenges of spinal injuries, as well as the physical ones. If Madison knew details about my therapy conversations, it meant she'd been monitoring my recovery more closely than I'd realized. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about whether your paralysis could be psychosomatic. Questions about experimental treatments. Questions about recovery timelines for your specific injury type." This conversation was spinning into territory I wasn't prepared to navigate. Yes, I'd been exploring every possible avenue for recovery. Yes, I'd researched cases of people with similar injuries who'd regained mobility. Yes, I'd asked Dr. Manning about cutting-edge treatments that might offer hope. Is wanting to recover a crime now? Recovery is wonderful, Axel. False hope is dangerous. And creating conspiracy theories about your accident to avoid accepting reality is unhealthy for everyone. Madison walked to her desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, I glimpsed what appeared to be a small recording device and several file folders. She pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to me. "What is this?" "Security camera footage from Dr. Manning's clinic, from your therapy sessions over the past 3 months. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and examined the photographs inside. They showed me during private therapy sessions, moments when I'd managed to briefly stand with support equipment, instances where I'd taken a few assisted steps exercises, where I demonstrated slight sensation in my legs. "Madison, this is my private medical treatment. How did you get these?" "I've been concerned about you. So I hired a private investigator to document your therapy progress. I wanted to understand if you were being realistic about your condition, or if someone was giving you false hope. The violation felt deeper than anything I'd experienced since the accident itself. Madison had been secretly surveilling my most vulnerable moments, documenting my desperate attempts to regain mobility treating my recovery efforts like some kind of criminal activity. You had me followed. You violated my privacy. You turned my medical treatment into surveillance footage. I protected you from exploitation. Do you know how much money you've spent on experimental treatments? Do you understand how these false hope clinics prey on people with disabilities? Those treatments are legitimate medical procedures. Those treatments are expensive placebo effects, and the fact that you've been hiding your progress from family suggests you're not being honest about your condition. I stared at the photograph, seeing myself through Madison's surveillance. In her version of events, I was either delusional about recovery prospects or actively deceiving people about my disability status. Either interpretation painted me as the problem in this situation. Madison, even if I've been making progress in therapy, that doesn't explain why you have modified blueprints from the lodge or why the construction foreman is at your party. Because you're connecting dots that don't exist. You're so desperate to blame someone for your accident that you're creating elaborate theories instead of accepting that sometimes bad things just happen. She moved toward the door, clearly wanting to end this conversation. The party is for my engagement, Axel. I'd appreciate if you could focus on that instead of manufacturing conspiracy theories about my relationship, my guests, or my business documents. As Madison left the office, I remained alone with the surveillance photographs and growing certainty that nothing about this evening was what it appeared to be. My accident, my recovery. Madison's knowledge of my treatment, progress, the presence of specific construction industry figures at her engagement party. None of these elements felt coincidental anymore. I tucked the photographs into my jacket pocket and headed back toward the party. But now I was searching for Detective Collins with urgent intensity. If she was here investigating something related to our family, I needed to understand what she'd discovered and whether it connected to my growing suspicions about Alpine Vista Lodge. The perfect family celebration was revealing itself as something much darker, and I had the sinking feeling that the truth would be more devastating than anything I could imagine. I found Detective Collins on Madison's wraparound deck, standing apart from the other guests as she surveyed the Boulder Hills landscape. The evening air was crisp with early autumn temperatures, and city lights twinkled across the valley below. She turned as I approached, and I noticed she'd positioned herself with a clear view of both the party inside and any vehicles arriving or departing. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand, "I've been hoping to speak with you this evening." "Detective Collins, I have to admit I'm surprised to see you at Madison's engagement party. Are you here in an official capacity?" She glanced around to ensure we weren't being overheard, then moved closer to the deck railing. "I'm here because your family's construction business is under federal investigation for insurance fraud, construction defects, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Over the past 18 months, my task force has identified a pattern of suspicious incidents involving Thompson Construction properties. Buildings that experience structural failures shortly after completion, resulting in injuries to specific individuals who subsequently received large insurance settlements." Collins pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photographs. 3 separate incidents in the past 5 years. A parking garage in Fort Collins where a support beam failed, injuring a city inspector who'd been questioning permit approvals. A hotel in Vail where a balcony collapsed during a grand opening, injuring a journalist who'd been investigating construction industry corruption. And Alpine Vista Lodge, where a deck railing failed, injuring an architectural engineer who had access to internal family business information. You think my accident was intentional? I think your accident was planned, executed, and covered up as part of a larger criminal enterprise. But I don't think you were the intended victim. Collins showed me additional photographs from the Alpine Vista incident. Security camera images from the lodge showed the moments before my fall, including several people who'd been on the deck that evening. The original target was supposed to be Marcus Webb, a federal contractor auditor who was investigating Thompson Construction's municipal projects. Webb was scheduled to attend your family retreat, and specifically requested access to the Alpine Vista deck to evaluate the construction quality. He was delayed by a last-minute emergency and arrived 2 hours after your accident occurred. I studied the security images, recognizing faces from that terrible weekend. Family members, business associates, construction industry contacts, all gathered for what I'd believed was a simple company retreat. You're saying someone deliberately weakened the deck railing, expecting it to injure a federal auditor? I'm saying Vincent Torres was paid $50,000 to ensure that railing would fail when Webb leaned against it. The structural modification was designed to support normal use, but collapse under the specific pressure of someone examining the construction details. But I was the one who fell. Because you were doing exactly what Webb would have done, examining the construction specifications, testing the stability, evaluating the engineering details. When you leaned against that railing to get a better view of the foundation work, it failed exactly as Torres had designed it to. Collins showed me bank records on her phone. Torres received the payment 3 days before your accident. The money came from an account controlled by Preston Walsh, ostensibly for construction consulting services on a hotel project. Preston was involved in planning my accident. Preston was the financial intermediary. The planning came from someone with detailed knowledge of Thompson construction projects, intimate familiarity with your professional habits, and access to family business information. I felt sick as the implications became clear. Madison, your sister has been systematically eliminating threats to the family construction business. Federal auditors, investigative journalists, whistleblowing city officials. Anyone who gets too close to discovering the truth about Thompson Construction's corrupt practices becomes a target. Collins pulled up additional files on her phone. Madison's real estate development business is a front for money laundering construction fraud proceeds. She identifies vulnerable properties, uses Thompson Construction to build with substandard materials, then arranges for structural failures that eliminate problems while generating insurance payouts. This is insane. Madison wouldn't hurt me intentionally. She didn't intend to hurt you. She intended to eliminate Marcus Webb and protect business operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Your injury was collateral damage in a larger criminal conspiracy. The detective showed me medical records I'd never seen before. After your accident, Madison became your primary medical advocate. She controlled information flow between doctors, influenced treatment decisions, and had access to all rehabilitation progress reports. She was being supportive. She was monitoring your recovery to ensure you remained dependent and unable to investigate the family business. Every experimental treatment you've pursued, every question you've asked about the accident, every suspicious observation you've made, Madison has been documenting and managing your responses. Collins showed me more surveillance photographs, images of me at Dr. Manning's clinic, but taken from different angles than the ones Madison had shown me earlier. These weren't taken by a private investigator Madison hired. These were taken by federal agents documenting your recovery as part of our investigation. You've been watching me too. We've been protecting you. Because once you started regaining mobility and asking questions about the Alpine Vista construction, you became the next target for elimination. The implications were staggering. My own sister had been involved in planning an attack that left me paralyzed, then spent 2 years monitoring my recovery to ensure I couldn't threaten the family business. My determination to regain mobility wasn't just personal rehabilitation, it was becoming evidence in a federal criminal case. Detective, what exactly are the charges you're investigating? Insurance fraud, construction defects resulting in bodily harm, conspiracy to commit violence, money laundering, bribery of public officials, and attempted murder. Your sister faces life in prison if convicted on all counts. And Preston's hotel properties have been laundering Thompson construction fraud proceeds for over 3 years. His family business is essentially a criminal organization disguised as hospitality services. I thought about the engagement party happening inside the 200 guests celebrating what they believed was a simple love story. Instead, they were witnesses to the final phase of a federal investigation that would destroy multiple family fortunes and expose decades of criminal activity. Why are you telling me this now? Because tonight Madison is planning to permanently eliminate the threat you represent. She knows you've been regaining mobility. She knows you're asking questions about the accident, and she knows our investigation is closing in on the family business. Collins showed me text messages recovered from Madison's phone, plans for handling the Axel situation tonight, discussions about making my condition permanently stable through medical intervention, arrangements for psychiatric institutionalization if I became too suspicious about family business operations. She's going to try to have you declared mentally incompetent based on paranoid delusions about the family business. Vincent Torres is here tonight to provide testimony that you've been making wild accusations about the Alpine Vista construction. Preston will support claims that you've become obsessed with conspiracy theories. And if that doesn't work, then they'll arrange for another accident that finishes what the deck collapse started. I gripped my wheelchair armrests as the full scope of the danger became clear. The engagement party wasn't a celebration, it was a trap. Madison had invited specific witnesses, positioned key players, and created the perfect opportunity to neutralize me permanently while maintaining plausible deniability. Detective, what do you need from me? I need you to go back inside, act normally, and wait for my signal. We have federal agents positioned throughout the party, but we need Madison and Preston to make their move before we can make arrests. You want to use me as bait? I want to give you the chance to help bring your sister to justice and expose the truth about what happened to you. Collins handed me a small recording device. Anything Madison says about the accident, the construction business, or her plans for your future, document everything. Tonight ends with either your sister in federal custody or you in a permanently disabled state. I took the device and headed back toward the party, understanding that the next hour would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Madison's criminal conspiracy would eliminate me as a threat forever. The perfect family celebration was about to become the scene of a federal takedown that would expose years of corruption and attempted murder. My recovery wasn't just personal anymore. It was evidence that could bring down an entire criminal organization. I wheeled back into the party with Detective Collins' recording device hidden in my jacket pocket, my mind racing with the knowledge that everyone I'd trusted had been part of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The celebration continued around me, but now I saw it differently. Preston's nervous energy, Madison's controlling attention to detail the carefully selected guest list that included construction industry contacts who could provide alibis or testimony. Dr. Patricia Manning approached me near the champagne tower, her expression concerned. Axel, you look pale. Are you feeling all right? Dr. Manning, I need to ask you something directly. Have you been sharing details about my therapy progress with Madison? Her face immediately showed discomfort. Your sister is listed as your primary emergency contact and medical advocate. She has legal authority to access information about your treatment. But have you been specifically reporting to her about my mobility improvements? Dr. Manning glanced around nervously, then moved closer. Axel Madison has been very concerned about your emotional state. She's worried that you've been developing unrealistic expectations about recovery, and she asked me to monitor your psychological responses to therapy progress. What kind of monitoring? She wanted to know if you were exhibiting signs of delusional thinking, paranoid ideation, or obsessive behavior related to your accident. She's been considering psychiatric evaluation if your mental state deteriorated further. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Madison had been positioning me for a competency challenge, gathering medical evidence to support claims that I was mentally unstable and prone to conspiracy theories. My questions about the Alpine Vista construction would be dismissed as paranoid delusions. My recovery progress would be reframed as dangerous false hope. And my suspicions about family business operations would become evidence of psychological breakdown. Dr. Manning, has Madison ever asked you to modify my treatment in any way She suggested that we focus more on acceptance and adaptation rather than aggressive recovery attempts. She feels that unrealistic rehabilitation goals are causing you psychological distress. And you agreed with that assessment. Dr. Manning hesitated. Frankly, Axel, I've been surprised by your recovery progress over the past 3 months. Your improvement has been more substantial than typically expected for your injury type. Madison suggested that we be cautious about encouraging false hope. I thought about the surveillance photographs Madison had shown me, realizing she'd been using my own medical progress as evidence against me. Every step forward in rehabilitation became proof of my supposedly delusional state. Dr. Manning, in your professional opinion, is my recovery progress medically legitimate? Absolutely. Your spinal injury was severe, but not necessarily permanent. With aggressive therapy, many patients with similar conditions do regain significant mobility. Your progress has been remarkable, but entirely consistent with successful rehabilitation. Madison appeared beside us, her smile bright, but her eyes watchful. Dr. Manning, I hope Axel isn't bothering you with too many medical questions tonight. He's been obsessing over his treatment lately. Actually, Madison, I was just telling Axel how impressive his recovery progress has been. His dedication to rehabilitation has produced results that exceed typical expectations for his injury type. Madison's expression flickered with something that looked like panic. Dr. Manning, perhaps we should discuss Axel's case privately sometime soon. I've noticed some concerning behavioral changes that might require professional evaluation. I decided to force the confrontation that had been building all evening. Madison, I'd like to make another toast to your engagement. She looked surprised. Axel, you already gave a lovely speech earlier. I have more thoughts I'd like to share with your guests. Before she could object, I wheeled toward the center of the room where the champagne tower dominated the marble foyer. Guests gradually quieted as I positioned myself near the microphone that had been set up for the evening's speeches. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for celebrating Madison and Preston's engagement tonight. But I also want to share something important about the Thompson family business that you should know. Madison moved quickly toward me, her face showing alarm. Axel, what are you doing? I'm telling the truth about Alpine Vista Lodge and what really happened during my accident 2 years ago. Preston appeared beside Madison, and I noticed Vincent Torres emerging from the crowd near the back of the room. The three of them formed a triangle around me, clearly trying to control whatever was about to happen. 2 years ago, I was injured when a deck railing collapsed at a Thompson construction property. Everyone believed it was a tragic accident, but tonight I've learned that the railing was deliberately weakened as part of a plan to eliminate a federal auditor who was investigating our family's business practices. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several guests began reaching for their phones, while others moved closer to hear more clearly. Madison grabbed the microphone from me. Everyone, please ignore my brother. He's been struggling with psychological issues related to his accident, and he's developed some unfortunate conspiracy theories that have no basis in reality. Madison, why is Vincent Torres at your engagement party? He's the construction foreman who inspected that deck before it collapsed. I don't know who you're talking about, Axel. You're having a paranoid episode. But Torres was clearly visible in the crowd, and several guests who recognized him from construction industry events began looking confused. Preston whispered urgently to Madison, who was now visibly sweating despite the evening's cool temperature. Madison, show everyone the 2 sets of blueprints you have in your office. Show them the original safety specifications and the modified plans that reduced structural support. Axel, you're embarrassing yourself and our family. You need help. I pulled out my phone and displayed the photographs Madison had given me earlier. The surveillance images of my therapy sessions. Madison hired investigators to spy on my medical treatment because she was worried I might recover enough mobility to investigate my own accident. Dr. Manning stepped forward. Axel, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Dr. Manning, tell everyone whether my recovery progress is medically legitimate or evidence of psychological delusion. She hesitated, looking between me and Madison. Axel's rehabilitation has been remarkably successful, His improvement is consistent with advanced physical therapy for his injury type. Madison's composure finally cracked. He's been lying to everyone. He's been secretly regaining mobility while pretending to be completely paralyzed. He's been manipulating sympathy and insurance benefits while hiding his recovery. The accusation hung in the air as guests stared at me with confusion and suspicion. Madison had just publicly accused me of insurance fraud, which would explain her surveillance and justify her concerns about my mental state. If that's true, Madison, then prove it. Fine, I will. Madison moved behind my wheelchair and suddenly pushed it forward with violent force. Stop faking for attention. Everyone here needs to see what you're really capable of. The wheelchair rolled rapidly toward the champagne tower, and instinctively I used my legs to try to brake and steer away from the collision. The movement was visible to everyone in the room, proof that Madison was right about my mobility. But instead of stopping, Madison grabbed the back of my wheelchair and physically lifted me out of it, hurling me directly into the $10,000 crystal display. The champagne tower exploded in a cascade of glass and alcohol as I crashed through it, using my legs to break my fall and shield myself from the sharp debris. As I lay in the wreckage, champagne soaking through my clothes and crystal fragments scattered around me, Madison stood over me screaming, "Look at him. Look at him using his legs. He's been lying to all of us for 2 years." The room erupted in shocked gasps and confused voices. But through the chaos, I heard Detective Collins speaking clearly into her radio. "All units move in. Suspects are engaged. We have assault and battery in progress." Madison had just attacked a disabled family member in front of 50 witnesses, proving that her concern for my well-being had been an elaborate facade. Her rage had finally revealed the truth about who she really was and what she'd been planning all along. The perfect family celebration had just become a crime scene. Federal agents moved through the party with swift efficiency, their badges clearly visible as they took positions throughout Madison's home. Detective Collins approached the champagne tower wreckage, where I remained on the marble floor, crystal fragments glinting in the overhead lighting like dangerous diamonds. "Axel, don't move until EMTs check for injuries." Collins instructed, then turned toward Madison. "Madison Thompson, you're under arrest for assault and battery insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and attempted murder." Madison stared in disbelief as an agent produced handcuffs. "This is insane. He was faking his disability. Everyone saw him use his legs." "What everyone saw," Collins replied, "was you physically attacking your disabled brother and throwing him into a glass display. Your brother's recovery progress is legitimate medical rehabilitation, not insurance fraud." Preston tried to move toward the exit, but agents blocked his path. "Preston Walsh, you're also under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to attempted murder." "I want my lawyer," Preston demanded, but his voice carried none of the confident charm he'd displayed earlier. Collins addressed the stunned party guests as additional agents secured the scene. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the conclusion of an 18-month federal investigation into Thompson Construction and Walsh Hotel Group. These organizations have been operating as criminal enterprises involved in construction fraud, insurance scams, and planned violence against federal investigators." Vincent Torres tried to disappear into the crowd, but agents apprehended him near the kitchen entrance. "Vincent Torres, you're under arrest for accepting bribes, construction fraud, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm." Dr. Manning knelt beside me as EMTs arrived. "Axel, can you tell me where you're hurt?" "My back, my left shoulder, cuts on my hands and arms from the glass." "But Dr. Manning, I need you to document that I used my legs to protect myself during the fall. That movement was a protective response, not evidence of fraud." "Of course, your mobility response was entirely appropriate medical rehabilitation, and anyone suggesting otherwise is misrepresenting your legitimate recovery progress." Collins showed her badge to the crowd and began explaining the investigation. Thompson Construction has been systematically building structures with substandard materials, then arranging for failures that eliminate threats while generating insurance payouts. The Alpine Vista Lodge deck collapse was planned to injure federal auditor Marcus Webb, but Axel Thompson was injured instead when he unknowingly triggered the sabotaged railing. She displayed evidence on a tablet computer. Bank records show $50,000 paid to Vincent Torres for ensuring structural failure at the lodge. Text messages between Madison Thompson and Preston Walsh discuss eliminating the Webb problem and managing collateral damage. Financial records show insurance fraud proceeds laundered through Walsh Hotel properties. Madison struggled against her handcuffs. Axel has been lying about his condition. He's been secretly mobile while collecting disability benefits. Madison Thompson has been monitoring her brother's legitimate medical recovery and misrepresenting it as fraud to discredit his potential testimony. Collins corrected. Dr. Manning, please explain Mr. Thompson's actual medical status. Dr. Manning addressed the crowd with professional authority. Axel Thompson sustained a severe but not necessarily permanent spinal injury. Over 18 months of aggressive rehabilitation, he has regained partial mobility consistent with successful recovery from his injury type. His progress has been documented legitimate and medically appropriate. Any suggestion that his recovery constitutes fraud demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of spinal injury rehabilitation. Collins continued presenting evidence. Madison Thompson has been planning to have her brother declared mentally incompetent to prevent his testimony in this federal investigation. She arranged tonight's confrontation to gather witnesses who would support claims that Axel suffers from paranoid delusions about the family business. Robert and Catherine Thompson arrived at the party just as their daughter was being arrested. "What's happening here?" Robert demanded. "Robert and Catherine Thompson, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and operating a criminal enterprise," Collins announced as additional agents moved toward them. "This is our daughter's engagement party," Catherine protested. "This is the conclusion of a federal investigation into decades of criminal activity by Thompson Construction," Collins replied. "Your construction business has been systematically defrauding municipal contracts, bribing inspectors building with substandard materials, and arranging for structural failures to eliminate federal oversight." She showed financial evidence to the gathered guests. Thompson Construction has stolen approximately $200 million in municipal contracts over 15 years. When federal auditors began investigating the family, began eliminating threats through planned accidents at their own properties. Derek Thompson. My cousin who worked in the family business approached Collins with a flash drive. "Detective, I have additional evidence you'll want to see." Madison stared at Derek in shock. "What are you doing?" "I've been documenting family business operations for the past 6 months as a federal informant," Derek announced. "This drive contains recordings of family meetings where Madison planned to permanently disable Axel if his recovery continued." Collins accepted the drive with satisfaction. Derek Thompson has been working with our task force to gather evidence of the conspiracy. His recordings include discussions of plans to arrange psychiatric institutionalization for Axel or eliminate him through another accident. Derek looked at Madison with genuine sadness. "Madison, you plan to have your own brother killed to protect business profits. I couldn't let that happen." Madison finally broke down completely. "I didn't want to hurt Axel, but he was going to destroy everything our family built. He was asking too many questions, recovering too much mobility, getting too close to the truth. The truth about what Madison Collins pressed. The truth about Alpine Vista. The truth about the deck collapse. The truth about why we needed Marcus Webb eliminated." Madison's confession was being recorded by multiple federal agents. Webb had evidence that could have sent our entire family to prison for decades. The construction fraud, the bribery, the municipal contract stealing. He had documentation that would have destroyed Thompson Construction. "So you arranged for Vincent Torres to sabotage the deck railing, Preston arranged the payment. Torres weakened the railing. But Axel wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to get hurt. It was supposed to be Webb who fell. Preston tried desperately to distance himself from Madison's confession. I never agreed to violence, I just provided financial services. You laundered $200 million in fraud proceeds, Collins responded. Your hotel properties have been washing Thompson Construction money for 3 years. Collins turned to address me as EMTs prepared to transport me for medical evaluation. Axel, your sister's attack tonight was the final evidence we needed to prove intent to harm. Combined with Derek's recordings and financial documentation, we have overwhelming evidence for federal convictions on multiple charges. As Madison was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one final time. Axel, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get hurt. I just couldn't let you destroy our family. Madison, our family destroyed itself through criminal activity. I was just trying to understand what happened to me. The engagement party had transformed into a federal crime scene, with evidence teams documenting everything from the Champagne Tower wreckage to the financial documents in Madison's office. 200 guests who'd expected to celebrate love and family unity instead witnessed the collapse of a multi-generational criminal enterprise. But for the first time in 2 years, I finally understood the truth about my accident and why my road to recovery had been so carefully monitored and controlled. Madison's attack had inadvertently freed me from the web of deception that had defined my life since Alpine Vista Lodge. Justice was finally within reach. Despite the cuts and bruises from Madison's attack, I refused to be taken to the hospital until I had addressed the party guests who'd witnessed everything. EMTs bandaged my wounds while I remained at the scene, determined to reclaim my voice and tell my own story rather than letting others define what had happened to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I called out, drawing the attention of guests who were still processing the arrests and revelations. I want to explain what you've just witnessed and what this means for everyone who has ever trusted Thompson Construction or Walsh Hotel Group. Detective Collins nodded approvingly as I positioned myself near the center of the room, speaking from the marble floor where Madison had thrown me into the champagne display. 2 years ago, I believed I'd been injured in a random accident. Tonight, I learned that my own sister planned my injury as part of a criminal conspiracy to eliminate federal oversight of our family's business operations. The person who was supposed to love and protect me was actually the person who orchestrated my suffering. I pulled out the surveillance photographs Madison had shown me earlier, holding them up for everyone to see. Madison spent 2 years monitoring my recovery, not out of love or concern, but to ensure I remained too dependent and fearful to investigate the truth about Thompson Construction's criminal activities. Dr. Manning stepped forward to support my statement. Axel's recovery has been medically legitimate and personally inspiring. His sister misrepresented his progress as fraud to discredit his potential testimony against the family business. I continued feeling strength returning with each word. Every time I asked questions about my accident, Madison convinced me I was being paranoid. Every time I made progress in physical therapy, she suggested I was developing unrealistic expectations. Every time I suspected something was wrong with our family business, she made me believe the problem was my mental state. Derek approached with additional evidence files. Axel, I have recordings of family meetings where Madison discussed plans for permanently managing your recovery if you became too suspicious about Alpine Vista Lodge. What did that mean? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. She was planning to have you declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. Or if that failed, to arrange for another accident that would finish what the deck collapse started. The assembled guests gasped as the full scope of Madison's intentions became clear. She hadn't just been willing to sacrifice my well-being for business purposes. She'd been prepared to eliminate me entirely if I became too much of a threat. Derek, why did you decide to work with federal investigators? Because I realized that Thompson Construction had become a criminal organization that was destroying innocent people's lives. The municipal fraud, the construction defects, the planned violence against federal auditors. It was all wrong, and it needed to stop. Collins presented additional evidence to the crowd. Thompson Construction has been responsible for structural failures that injured 17 people over 5 years. Madison Thompson personally planned 3 of those incidents to eliminate specific threats to the family business. I thought about those 17 victims, people like me who'd trusted Thompson Construction and suffered because of the family's greed and willingness to use violence. How many of those people never learned the truth about what happened to them? Most of them accepted their injuries as random accidents and never suspected deliberate sabotage. Collins replied, "Your case is unique because you had the engineering knowledge to recognize construction defects and the family access to discover evidence." I stood up slowly, using my regained leg strength to demonstrate that Madison's claims about my recovery were medically legitimate rather than fraudulent. Several guests who'd known me before the accident began applauding as I took my first public steps in 2 years. Madison accused me of faking my paralysis for attention and sympathy. But the truth is that she spent 2 years trying to keep me dependent and fearful, so I couldn't threaten her criminal enterprise. My recovery isn't fraud. It's the result of refusing to let her define my limitations. Preston, still in handcuffs, tried to make a final appeal to the crowd. Everyone here knows the Walsh family has operated legitimate businesses for 3 generations. Whatever Madison was doing with Thompson Construction doesn't reflect on Walsh Hotel Group operations. Collins immediately contradicted him. Walsh Hotel Group has laundered over $200 million in construction fraud proceeds. Preston Walsh personally approved financial transfers that funded bribes to municipal officials and payments for planned structural sabotage. She showed bank records on her tablet. Every major Thompson Construction fraud was processed through Walsh Hotel accounts disguised as legitimate business expenses. Preston wasn't just Madison's romantic partner. He was her criminal partner. I addressed Preston directly. "You were at Alpine Vista Lodge the weekend I was injured. Did you know about the plan to sabotage the deck railing? The men begin and ganschinike." Preston's silence was answer enough. He'd known about the planned attack on Marcus Webb and had done nothing to prevent my injury when the wrong person triggered the trap. "Preston, you watched me spend 2 years believing my injury was a random accident. You attended family gatherings where I struggled with mobility. You participated in conversations about my recovery progress. And you never once suggested that my injury was anything other than terrible luck. I couldn't expose the business operations," Preston finally admitted. "Too many people depended on Thompson Construction and Walsh Hotel Group for employment and financial security, including federal investigators who were trying to prevent more people from getting hurt by your criminal activities," Collins added. I turned back to the assembled guests, many of whom were recording everything on their phones. Thompson Construction and Walsh Hotel Group have stolen hundreds of millions of dollars from Colorado taxpayers through fraudulent municipal contracts. They've injured dozens of innocent people through deliberately defective construction. They've bribed officials, laundered money, and used violence against federal investigators. Derek handed me one final piece of evidence, a recording device containing Madison's voice discussing plans for my permanent management, if recovery continued. This recording contains my sister's voice planning my murder if I became too much of a threat to the family business. She was prepared to kill me rather than allow justice for the crimes that left me paralyzed. I pressed play, and Madison's voice filled the room. "If Axel continues asking questions about Alpine Vista, we'll need to arrange for a permanent solution. Another accident, a psychiatric commitment, something that ensures he can never testify against family operations." The guests listened in horrified silence as Madison calmly discussed eliminating her own brother to protect criminal profits. When the recording ended, several people were visibly emotional. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is justice finally being served. Madison Thompson, Preston Walsh, Vincent Torres, and my parents will face federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. Thompson Construction and Walsh Hotel Group will be dissolved, and their assets will be used to compensate the victims of their criminal activities. Collins addressed the crowd one final time. The federal investigation into this criminal enterprise is now complete. We have recovered evidence of fraud, money laundering, bribery, planned violence, and conspiracy spanning 15 years of operations. Justice will be served for every victim of Thompson Construction's criminal activities. As federal agents concluded their arrests and began processing evidence, I remained standing in Madison's marble foyer, surrounded by the wreckage of her champagne tower and her carefully constructed lies. For the first time in 2 years, I knew the complete truth about what had happened to me, why it had happened, and who was responsible. Madison's attack had been intended to discredit me, but instead it had provided the final evidence needed to expose her criminal conspiracy. My recovery wasn't just personal rehabilitation anymore. It was proof that she hadn't succeeded in destroying me. And it was evidence that justice could prevail over even the most elaborate criminal deception. The perfect family celebration had become the perfect ending to a federal investigation that would restore justice for everyone Thompson Construction had hurt. 6 months later, I stood in the courthouse lobby in Denver, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as Madison was escorted in handcuffs to the federal prison transport van. She'd received 8 years for her role in the criminal conspiracy, a sentence that reflected both the severity of her crimes and her cooperation with investigators in exposing the full scope of Thompson Construction's operations. Preston had received 12 years for money laundering and conspiracy, while my parents faced 15 years each for operating a criminal enterprise. Vincent Torres served 6 months in county jail and was now working legitimately for my new construction company, helping us identify and repair structural defects in buildings throughout Colorado. The past half year had been a journey of recovery, justice, and rebuilding that exceeded anything I'd imagined possible. During those dark months of believing my accident was random misfortune, Thompson Recovery Construction had emerged from the ashes of my family's criminal empire. Using my architectural engineering background and the settlement funds recovered from insurance fraud restitution, I'd started a company focused specifically on building accessibility and safety. Our first projects involved repairing the structural defects Thompson Construction had deliberately built into municipal buildings across Colorado. Dr. Patricia Manning had become more than my physical therapist. She'd become a business partner in developing rehabilitation facilities that combined medical treatment with vocational retraining for people recovering from work-related injuries. Our pilot program in Denver had helped 43 individuals regain independence after accidents that had left them believing their productive lives were over. Detective Sarah Collins and I had established the Thompson Foundation for Construction Safety, a nonprofit organization that provided independent structural inspections for municipal projects and advocacy for victims of construction industry fraud. Our work had already identified 12 buildings with Thompson Construction defects and prevented potential injuries to thousands of Colorado residents. Vincent Torres brought a unique perspective to our team. His 20 years of construction experience, combined with his firsthand knowledge of industry corruption, made him invaluable in identifying buildings that required immediate safety intervention. Axel, he often told me, I spent decades building things wrong. Now I want to spend whatever time I have left making things right. The federal investigation had uncovered 17 separate incidents where Thompson Construction had deliberately caused structural failures to eliminate threats or generate insurance payouts. We'd contacted every victim, providing them with the truth about their injuries and helping them pursue additional compensation for the deception they'd endured. My own recovery had progressed beyond anything Madison had tried to prevent. Through aggressive physical therapy and experimental treatments she'd attempted to discourage, I'd regained nearly complete mobility. I still used mobility aids for long distances, or when fatigue affected my stamina, but I was no longer defined by limitations others had tried to impose on me. The most difficult part of the entire experience had been learning to forgive Madison while holding her accountable for her choices. During my monthly visits to the Federal Correctional Facility in Florence, we'd begun having honest conversations about how greed and family loyalty had corrupted her judgment and led her to justify increasingly harmful actions. Axel, I convinced myself that protecting the family business was more important than protecting you, she'd admitted during one particularly difficult conversation. I told myself that your injury was an unfortunate accident and that managing your recovery was necessary for family security. But the truth is that I was scared of losing everything, and I was willing to sacrifice anyone, even you, to maintain control. Those conversations were emotionally exhausting, but they'd been necessary for my own healing. I needed to understand how someone who'd claimed to love me could have been prepared to eliminate me when I became inconvenient. Preston had shown less remorse during the legal proceedings, maintaining that he'd simply provided financial services without understanding the criminal implications. His family's hotel empire had been dissolved, with assets distributed among fraud victims and community restoration projects. The broader impact of exposing Thompson Construction's criminal activities had extended far beyond our family. The investigation had led to reforms in municipal contracting processes, mandatory independent inspections for all public construction projects, and stronger whistleblower protections for construction industry employees who reported safety violations. Derek had become my closest family relationship, working alongside me at Thompson Recovery Construction and helping develop policies that prioritized worker safety and structural integrity over profit maximization. We're proving that construction can be both profitable and ethical, he often reminded our team. Our family's legacy doesn't have to be defined by the crimes Madison and our parents committed. Dr. Manning had documented my recovery progress as part of research into spinal injury rehabilitation that challenged traditional assumptions about permanent paralysis. Her work was helping other patients pursue aggressive treatment options that might restore mobility previously considered impossible. The most meaningful aspect of the entire experience had been discovering that adversity could reveal strength I'd never known I possessed. Madison's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed me from depending on others for validation or permission to pursue my own recovery and purpose. Standing in that courthouse lobby, watching Madison disappear into the prison transport van, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and determination. Justice had been served, but it hadn't erased the years of deception or the pain of discovering that family loyalty could be weaponized to justify criminal behavior. Thompson Recovery Construction was thriving, employing 67 people in work that prioritized safety, accessibility, and community benefit over maximum profit. We'd repaired structural defects in over 200 buildings, prevented countless potential injuries, and demonstrated that construction could be a force for community building, rather than exploitation. The Thompson Foundation had become a model for construction industry oversight, working with federal investigators to identify and prevent fraud in municipal contracting. Our advocacy had resulted in policy changes that protected both workers and community members from the kind of criminal negligence my family had practiced for decades. Most importantly, I'd learned that recovery, physical, emotional, and moral, was possible, even after the most devastating betrayals. Madison had tried to control my limitations and define my possibilities, but she'd ultimately failed because healing and justice were stronger than deception and greed. My mobility was better than ever. My purpose was clearer than ever. And my understanding of genuine family relationships had been strengthened by learning to distinguish between authentic love and manipulative control. The past would always carry scars from the Alpine Vista Lodge collapse and the 2 years of deception that followed. But the future held unlimited possibilities for building something better from the wreckage of criminal conspiracy. Thompson Recovery Construction. The Thompson Foundation and my personal recovery had all emerged from Madison's attempts to destroy me. Her greatest failure was that trying to eliminate me had actually revealed the strength and purpose I'd needed to help others and contribute to justice. Justice had been served, healing was ongoing, and the work of building something better continued every day. The courthouse steps led toward a future where construction served communities where family meant genuine support rather than manipulation, and where recovery was possible, even after the deepest betrayals. Madison had tried to push me out of my wheelchair to expose what she claimed was deception. Instead, she'd pushed me toward a life of purpose, justice, and authentic strength that she'd never intended to create. Sometimes the greatest victories come from surviving the worst betrayals and choosing to build something better from the destruction others leave behind. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was deceiving you about something fundamental to your life? How did you find the strength to rebuild after that kind of betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to support content that explores difficult topics with honesty and hope. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming adversity and finding justice when it seems impossible. And share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that recovery and redemption are possible even after the most devastating family betrayals. Thank you for listening to this journey from deception to justice. And remember that your limitations are often defined by others who benefit from your dependence. Sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to accept the boundaries others try to impose on your possibilities. Until next time, keep fighting for your truth and never let anyone else define what you're capable of achieving.